Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of people don't know how to ask questions.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am happy to welcome you to the first of 3 programs in the Newton History Series, co-sponsored with the Newton Free Library. We're very happy to be working with them on this program. I'm Clara Silverstein. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Historic Newton. And unfortunately, Ellen Myers, who's with the library, could not be with us tonight, but we're happy to be presenting the program. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that Newton is on the traditional homeland of the Massachusetts people who've lived in this region for more than 12,000 years. Our next Newton History Series event will be Thursday, February 23rd at 7 p.m. when Stephen Whitfield of Brandeis University presents Jewish Lawyers Against Jim Crow, a look at some of the people fighting against racial segregation in the South, including a young Barney Frank. And on Thursday, February 16th, Historic Newton is presenting a talk about some of the Black families who moved from Richmond, Virginia to West Newton between 1870 and 1900, and they helped establish the neighborhood that is near what is now Myrtle Baptist Church. What did they leave behind, and how did they build a community after they arrived? You can find information about our upcoming events at our website, historicnewton.org, and at the Newton Free Library. They have a robust website with many, many programs. In the chat, I will be giving information about how you can get Barry Wanger's book. So wait for that after I've introduced him. So now I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Barry Wanger. He's a longtime Newton resident and a former newspaper editor and reporter. He headed his own public relations firm for 35 years and served as public affairs director for Brandeis University and the National Endowment for the Humanities. He was also a press secretary to major U.S. presidential and senatorial candidates. And he has written a biography of Arnold Hiatt, and he's going to tell us more about it. And when you have questions, put them in the chat as he speaks or afterwards, and then we'll come back on for a Q&A. Thank you, and welcome, Barry.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks for such a lovely introduction. I'm very excited to be here. And especially, it's very nice to be here in my own warm apartment rather than being outside someplace. There are a few subjects I like talking about more than Arnold Hiatt. Few people have had a more inspiring and impactful life. The Harvard Business Review wrote in 1992 that Hiatt was widely regarded as one of the most responsible employers and corporate citizens in the United States, and one of the few success stories in the US footwear industry. But before I begin to tell you a little bit about my biography of Hiatt, who used to live in Waban and send his kids to Zervis, I'd like to acknowledge and thank a few people. First, I'm honored to be invited by Newton Historic, and a special thank you to Clara Silverstein for the wonderful job of organizing and putting on that display in the library. I'd also like to thank the Newton Public Library for hosting my presentation, and the library certainly has a special place in my heart. You know, I've been going there for 40 years, and there were plenty of Saturday mornings I went there with my daughter reading some books. And a special thank you to my wife, Wendy, as well as Sarah, for their amazing support during the 2 years it took me to research and write the book, Arnold Hiatt, Turning Business into a Force for Good. And my final thank you is for all of you watching here on Zoom. My goal for each of you is to learn about and be inspired by the life of Arnold Hiatt, just as I have been in writing the book. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you about Hiatt's life, why I wrote the book, and read a few short excerpts. By the way, I hope you don't mind, that I'm reading most of my presentation, my friends will tell you that there's a reason I'm a writer and not a public speaker. So we have plenty of time to ask questions afterwards, and Clara will be monitoring that. So I expect many of you know about Hiatt from his years at StrideRight, when he turned the company into a household name and one of the country's most successful corporations during the 20 years he was CEO from 1972 to 1992. If you lived in Boston during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you probably were aware of Hiatt, as he was arguably the most widely known corporate executive in Boston, or at least one of the most widely known corporate executives in Boston, as well as nationally. I don't want to downplay the significance of what he did at StrideRight, but he'd be the first to tell you what was most important to him was not what he did at StrideRight, but what it enabled him to do. He created, let me just give you this list. He created the first corporate on-site childcare in the country and was instrumental in getting other corporations to follow suit. He built the first corporate intergenerational daycare center in the country. He promoted many women to senior level positions at StrideRight way before there was anyone even heard the term glass ceiling. He was instrumental in helping free South Korea's first democratically elected president, who had been arrested in what was basically a coup and was under house arrest and threatened with death. He banned smoking in the workplace long before it became fashionable. He was an early advocate of policies that support family leave and adoption benefits for his employees. He played a leading role in trying to get back the stolen paintings from the Isabella Stewart Garden Museum. He served as a mentor, business partner, and investor to famous Boston chef Barbara Lynch, who's founded Nine Park, Menton, and some other restaurants. He was a leader in the campaign finance movement and worked closely with Nancy Pelosi and Bill Moyers in advocating for change. He was a confidant of Senator Gene McCarthy's presidential campaign and served as the campaign's treasurer. He created the StrideRight's public service program that became a model for the Clinton administration's Corporation for National and Community Service. He served as a delegate to the United Nations Human Rights Commission and co-founded Business for Social Responsibility. And this is just a partial list. In the book, I talk in a lot of detail about a lot of these issues, a lot of these things he did. And I haven't even talked about his work as a philanthropist. He has given untold millions of dollars to nonprofit organizations, particularly smaller ones that support young children and the underprivileged. Most of it was done under the radar. You'll never see his name on a university building or a hospital building. In introducing Hiatt at an awards ceremony a few years back, Rob Stein, who is the founder of Democracy Alliance, said this about Hiatt. His wish is to be unacknowledged and to credit anyone but himself for most anything he does. And I could certainly vouch for that. In writing the book, I spent more than 40 hours interviewing Hiatt over a 2-year period, and getting to talk about anything personal was a real challenge. He didn't volunteer much, but he never refused to answer a question. He agreed for me to write the book really for 3 reasons. His eldest son wanted his children, Hiatt's grandchildren, to know more about their grandfather's life. Hiatt wanted to answer a question that he often received from business school students. Is there more to business than money, than making money? And he trusted me as we had worked together on a number of projects promoting the work of the StrideRight Foundation. I wasn't interested really in writing a business book, as he initially wanted, although those interested in his business side of his life will learn a lot about how he made StrideRight such a success and how they could replicate some of the things he did to make their own businesses more successful. I found what he accomplished outside of StrideRight the most interesting story to tell. And I think the book does both. It talks both about the business as well as so many of his other ventures. And I agreed to write the book as long as I had complete editorial control. And I wanted to write a book that looked at his successes and mistakes and to better understand his life and the motivation for the things he did. He kept his end of the bargain. The only thing he asked me to take out really were a few paragraphs about how some of his family, many of his family members died in the Holocaust. And I went into some detail about that he had some good records, but I took most of that out. Basically, the way I worked was to bring my tape recorder with me to his office downtown and ask him leading questions about different aspects of his life, and starting with his earliest memories. But as we began to talk, I realized that there was a really important story to tell. Others agreed with me, including two of his good friends who were very influential in how I organized the book. One was Doris Kearns Goodwin, the Pulitzer-winning biographer, and she gave me some very good advice after reading an early draft. And the other person was Nader Dashari, who's the former CEO of Houghton Mifflin, who encouraged me to write a book that would appeal to a broader audience. So it's nice to have someone like Hiatt who has friends like that, certainly. In putting together the biography, I've interviewed two of his children, a number of business associates, others whose lives were impacted by his work outside of Stride Right, and went through file cabinets full of corporate records, speeches, and correspondence. But most of the biography is based on the extensive interviews I had with Hiatt, as he had so many interesting stories to tell. There are inside stories about Eugene McCarthy's unsuccessful campaign for president, how he acquired Keds from Uniroyal for a song and then turned it into a $75 million a year business, how he lectured Bill Clinton about the need for campaign finance reform, and I'll tell a little bit more about that story in a few minutes. And when I asked him a few questions about his views on Israel, I learned about a private dinner he had with Gene McCarthy at Golda Meir's apartment in Israel, and how he was a driving force, how Hiatt was a driving force in launching J Street, the pro-Israel lobbying organization. So I'd like to read a few excerpts from the book. The first one is going to be about the McCarthy campaign. And as someone who has been involved in presidential campaigns myself, I found Hiatt's leadership role in McCarthy's presidential campaign particularly fascinating. I believe McCarthy's campaign would have never gotten off the ground, really, without Hiatt's financial skills. He ran some of the first fundraisers for McCarthy, became a close confidant of McCarthy, and traveled with him to most of the primary states. I was with him during the angry protest at the convention in Chicago and served as the campaign's treasurer. There's an interesting backstory to all this. Hiatt was a strong opponent of the Vietnam War. And just as he started his job at Stride Right, he was took over his company that he started, and they were grooming him to actually be the CEO of Stride Right. But he was there for after he was there for about a month, he decided to just take a ride up to Manchester, New Hampshire, where the McCarthy campaign was headquartered, and just talk to some of the young people there who were running the campaign, and he was very impressed. He went back several other times and then decided to tell his boss that he'd like to work, he's going to take a leave of absence, basically, to work on the campaign. And he didn't know if he'd ever have his job back when he came back, but he really didn't care. And that's the type of person he was. So here's an excerpt from a chapter on the book about the McCarthy campaign. This was right after the New Hampshire, after votes were being counted in New Hampshire. As the votes were being tallied, McCarthy was in his suite at the Sheraton Wayfarer Hotel in Manchester, along with Hiatt, the senator's wife Abigail, and their daughter Mary, watching the returns. McCarthy had heard that some of his young campaign staff often called Hiatt for advice. The two had struck up a friendship. McCarthy spent virtually all his time campaigning in New Hampshire, and Hiatt was one of the few folks in a campaign over 30. As the votes started coming in, the phone rang. David Brinkley, the NBC News anchor, was on the line, inviting McCarthy to do a live interview at the hotel, which was media central for journalists and where the candidate and many of the senior staff stayed. Brinkley hadn't even planned to come to New Hampshire, but as the returns from Dixville Notch and other Granite State towns started coming in, it became clear that something unexpected was happening. Brinkley gathered his crew and quickly headed up to New Hampshire. Once there, Brinkley contacted McCarthy and invited him over for an interview. McCarthy, nonchalant as usual, told Hiatt that they should accept the offer. He was a man of a few words, very calm all the time, Hiatt remembered. They walked together to the interview across the outdoor courtyard. It was snowing and the temperature had sunk to 20 degrees. Hiatt, dressed only in short sleeves and slacks, was walking behind a candidate when McCarthy suddenly turned around and asked, "If I'm in the White House, what do you want?" Hiatt was taken aback. He jokingly responded that he would love to be postmaster at Waterville Valley in New Hampshire, where he often skied with his family. It wouldn't be the last time a politician would ask him if he was interested in a job, but it was the only time that he ever responded positively, even in jest. Okay. So the McCarthy campaign really launched a lifetime of political activism for Hiatt. He was one of the largest donors of the Democratic Congressional Committee in several elections and provided direct funding to 70 congressional candidates in 2018. I think a lot of candidates had his name on speed dial. And another favorite story of mine is when Hiatt lectured not too pleased Bill Clinton about campaign finance reform at a small dinner party with top corporate executives at the Mayflower Hotel across the street from the White House. This was just after his beginning his second term in office. So the president spoke first. It was classic Washington, D.C. patter, as Clinton began by expressing his deep appreciation to everyone there. He told the dinner guests that they had made many of his administration's achievements over the past 4 years possible. For that, he said, he was immensely grateful. Then he rattled off data describing a lower crime rate, unemployment that had been reduced to its lowest level in 35 years, and robust economic growth. It was a shameless display of stroking, and the purr of the fat cats must have been audible across the Potomac and into Virginia, Hiatt wrote in a note for his files. Gore extolled the president in a way that reminded me of Vice President Humphrey and Lyndon Johnson. He hailed the chief as a man of great courage, boundless energy, and vision, who at the end of the day received little more than character assassination in the press. The corporate leaders around the table followed the vice president's lead. It seemed they couldn't laud the president enough. One after another, they told him how indebted they were to him on behalf of their children and grandchildren. Then it was Hyatt's turn to speak. If Clinton was expecting to hear the same kind of lavish praise from the stride-right CEO, he was going to be disappointed. Hiatt began by invoking President Roosevelt's name, as he knew Clinton was a great admirer of the late president, particularly his courage in being willing to take unpopular stands 57 years earlier, when he prepared the nation for a war he knew was coming, despite the strong isolationist views of Congress and the public. There was little sentiment for intervention in a war considered to be foreign and none of our business, but the president knew it would become our war. No one said it could be done, but using his office and considerable leadership, he educated American people that developed support for Lend-Lease and then national conscription, Hiatt said. He pivoted to what is one of his top subjects, money on politics, an issue about which he was particularly passionate. As you know, the current campaign finance practices are threatening this nation in a different but no less serious way, he said. Ironically, the public perception is that the Democratic Party is more responsible for the sleaze than the Republicans, that we stand for special interest and foreign money. Only your leadership can turn that around. Hiatt then talked about polls that showed the American public was in favor of clean elections and urged the president to take the lead in favor of supporting campaign finance reform, implying that he needed to be courageous, just like President Roosevelt. The Democratic Party must move out front now. The train on campaign finance reform is leaving the station and will run over us and will never catch up. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the president stood up to speak. I agree with everything Arnold said, but I can't spend all my time on this with so many other pressing issues. Hiatt left the dinner feeling that his reference to Roosevelt displaying leadership had fallen on deaf ears. I came away from the evening with empathy for a skunk at a lawn party, he said, but with no regrets. So I guess you're beginning to understand that Hiatt isn't your typical CEO. So my biography of Hiatt actually begins, traditionally enough, with his grandparents' life in a shtetl in Lithuania, and chronicles his early life growing up in wartime Worcester. It's a story not unfamiliar to first-generation Americans. He was particularly influenced at that time by his uncle, Jacob Hiatt, who was, many of you may know, He was the chairman of the board of Brandeis at one time, and he actually started Rand Whitney Corporation, which he eventually turned over to his son-in-law, Robert Kraft, the president of the owner of the Patriots. Kraft's wife was Arnold's cousin. So, but his life really started taking some interesting turns after he enters Harvard. He shocks his family by dropping out after only 1 year to join the Merchant Marine, where he served as a lowly seaman, traveling the world for almost a year. He reluctantly returned, graduated, and within a couple of years was given the opportunity to take over Blue Bonnet, a small bankrupt shoe company with only a couple of employees in Lawrence. It was an offer that came right out of the blue. And it turned out to be an amazing situation for him. In 10 years, he started off not knowing much about the business, but he took a suitcase full of shoes and started traveling in different parts of the country by bus, by train, even hitchhiking to meet with major retailers and trying to convince them that to see exactly what they wanted, see if they would buy some of his shoes, and if not the shoes he had, he wanted to find out what they were looking for. And then he'd go back to his headquarters, his store, his factory, and manufacture shoes to meet those needs. And it worked very well. It grew within 10 years, it grew into a thriving $5 million a year business. And then he sold it reluctantly to StrideRite for $4 million. StrideRite kept offering him money and he kept turning it down, but finally it was an offer too good to refuse. And typical Hiatt, of the $4 million, he decided to give $1 million to his brother and $1 million to his sister. He felt they were both in academic medicine and would never make all that much money. And he would still have $2 million, which was more money than he knew what to do with. But StrideRite really hired him, not as much they wanted his company, but they really wanted him. And they were certainly grooming him to be a potential CEO. And it was clearly a great decision for both Hiatt as well as StrideRite. He turned it into such a powerhouse that Investors Business Daily called it one of the 3 most successful and profitable companies in the country during his 20-year tenure as president and CEO. A $100,000 investment in 1984 was worth $1.4 million only 8 years later. I'll talk a bit later about how he made StrideRite such a success story and household name, but to understand Hiatt, you need to understand his business philosophy. He once wrote, quote, "While there is no Hippocratic oath for heads of corporations, there is nevertheless a compelling responsibility that all share, one way or another, in meeting the needs of society. It is only good sense for corporations to be involved in the community. Corporations cannot separate work and family life, for their success ultimately depends on the well-being of the community." There are certainly some companies, although clearly not enough, who today can be considered socially responsible. But Hiatt did it some 50 years ago when social responsibility was basically an unknown concept, in the corporate world. Hiatt was really guided by a personal philosophy, with apologies to Nike, do the right thing. I asked him a number of times during our interviews what the motivation was for the decisions he made, charitable, corporate, or whatever. His answer was invariably the same. It was the right thing to do, he simply said. A good example was his decision to launch the first corporate childcare center in the country in 1971, decades before most corporations gave much of any thought about the childcare needs of their employees. The way it started was he just looked out the window of his office in Roxbury and saw some young kids playing in the street. He talked to some of his employees and learned about their childcare challenges. So he not only decided to build the center, and he provided subsidies for the employers, invited some children of local families to join the center as well, just because he felt it was the right thing to do, he told me. And he also became, as typical Hiatt, became a leading advocate for childcare. He wrote op-eds. He sent some of his members of his child center team on his own dime, or on StrideRite's own dime, to other corporations around the country to help them build their own centers. And And he also testified in Congress and the State House, played a key role in establishing the country's first Department of Education and Care in Massachusetts, and helped launch Strategies for Children, which was the state's largest early education advocacy organization. And Strategies for Children is really emblematic of how he operated. I'm not aware of any cause or organization he got involved in which he didn't take a leadership role. In Strategies for Children, the New Israel Fund, Business for Social Responsibility, and so many others, he served as board chair and helped recruit top professionals to help run the organization. He was very involved in whatever he did. He wasn't just a board member he didn't need add something else to his resume. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is another case in point. He turned down a number of offers to serve on the board until they offered his one demand, which was to serve as chair of the search committee. The museum was very staid, he felt, in its ways, and not particularly welcome to the broader community. So he convinced the board to hire Anne Hawley, a very non-traditional choice, and she was instrumental in developing the many outreach programs and turned the museum into one of the best museums around, during her 25-year tenure. I tried not to turn Hiatt into a saint in the book. Not every business decision he made was the best. He had an opportunity to acquire Reebok, but turned that down. And Fireman turned it into a billion-dollar business. He had an opportunity to invest in the Patriots when Kraft first bought it, but he turned that down. He had a rocky relationship with his father, and for many years with his older brother Howard, was clearly his father's favorite son. And Howard, by the way, is quite prominent in himself, and is probably best known for his serving as dean of the Harvard School of Public Health for many years. Today, both brothers are in their mid-90s and have become good friends over the years. But back to StrideRight. While Hiatt is exceedingly proud in the company's success when he led it, the truth is he never really wanted to go into business. He was planning to get a graduate degree in English and become a teacher, but he got married shortly after graduation and figured he couldn't support his family on a teacher's salary. So he saw business as an opportunity to earn a good living, and later realized it could support his passion for social justice in the broadest sense. Frankly, he is as proud as the millions he was able to convince the StrideRight board to put into the StrideRight Foundation. They gave over 5% of corporate profits to the foundation, and most companies give 1%, if that. And he was as proud of that as he was about selling millions of shoes and turning StrideRight into that household name. In the book, I devote individual chapters to many of the areas where he devoted so much of his time, as well as his personal life story. There are chapters on corporate political power, boom years of StrideRight, fighting for clean elections, the night at the museum, and finding love, for example. His 48-year marriage to his late wife, Anne, who was a force of nature in her own right, is a wonderful love story. So you must have a lot of questions about Hiatt by now. So I'd like to wrap up by talking very briefly, I'm sure we're both happy about that, about two things: what he did to make StrideRight such a success, and one of his most impactful and favorite philanthropic ventures. Here are some lessons that those interested in business could learn from Hiatt's years at StrideRight. He made excellent acquisitions that were in the wheelhouse of his expertise: Keds, Berry Topsiders, and Herman Shoe Company, who manufactured Survivor boots. He turned down other opportunities to purchase companies, acquire other companies that weren't in his wheelhouse, children's clothing and stores, businesses like that. And he was very focused on what he knew. He was a hands-on executive. He made the final decision on all new shoe models. He walked the factory floors to talk to employees and knew every single aspect of the shoe business, including sourcing the best leather. He learned that when he was over at Blue Bonnet, so he had to know everything: how the shoes were made, what made a good shoe, and what was quality. And he also visited Stride-Rite retail stores without identifying himself to find out firsthand what worked and what didn't. He didn't believe in expensive marketing research. He went to talk to the customers himself and talk to the employees at the different stores and found out what was selling, what wasn't selling, what made employees, what made customers happy and what they didn't like. He also provided grant. That's that one. He was considerably better talent evaluator than Chaim Bloom. He interviewed top executives personally and disdained research firms. He hired from within, promoted women to the most senior positions, and was not adverse to hiring non-traditional people to key jobs. People who never even worked in the shoe industry, but he thought were very bright. He treated his employees extremely well. His benefits were second to none, and he paid the highest salaries. It was the right thing to do on multiple levels, he told me. Happy employees are more productive, and it was quite expensive to hire and train a replacement. And there was nothing more important to him than customer service and quality products. He emphasized that in all aspects of the business. And he made a science out of fitting shoes correctly, and customer complaints went right to him. And if a store had more than a few complaints and weren't handled well, that store might be looking for a new manager. He was one of the last companies to move most of his manufacturing to Asia. But instead of going for the best price and outsourcing everything, he partnered with factories and paid more to get the best product. Typical of Hiatt, he insisted that his partner factory opened the first on-site childcare center in Asia, and required that each of his factories he worked with adhere to child labor laws and provide an education to anyone working there under 16. I'd like to conclude with this more formal part of the presentation with what was one of Hiatt's most successful philanthropic ventures, and one that he personally found most gratifying, the Stride-Rite Public Service and Scholars Program for Harvard and Northeastern students. The programs were designed to encourage Harvard undergraduates and Northeastern Law School students to consider careers in public service. He started by awarding 10 Harvard students and 5 Northeastern undergrads $20,000 to $25,000 grants per year that would help them pay tuition, books, and part-time jobs working with nonprofits during the school year and full-time during the summer. He also provided grants to students who wanted to start their own nonprofit organizations. A student who founded one nonprofit went on to win a MacArthur Genius Award for her work. Many others went on to successful careers in public service. The programs continued to grow, and overall he spent, well, not him personally, but Stride-Rite Foundation, and later his own family foundation, awarded more than $5 million to this program. One of the program participants, in fact, was a woman named Priscilla Chan, whose parents escaped Vietnam in a boat, and she worked during the program. She worked for an after-school program that served children in a housing project in Dorchester. She later graduated medical school and married Mark Zuckerberg, the co-founder of Facebook. A couple of years ago, she donated over $12 million to the Scholars Program to ensure that it will continue to serve Harvard undergrads for the next 15 years. So on that note, let's get to the most interesting part of many presentation. That's trying to answer your questions. So.
All right, thank you so much. We actually have some questions. One question already came into the chat. I just, before I get to the question, I just also want to say what an interesting person you found to talk about. And he did live in Woburn for many years.
Right.
So that's the connection. He raised his children here, I believe.
Right. He used to play tennis in South High School.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So there's always a Newton connection in the stories that we bring to the public. The person has asked, has Hiatt inspired any others to emulate his approach to business? And did he mentor other business leaders? So I think that's two parts.
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know personally who he inspired, but clearly public corporate social responsibility is something that's become, quite, I don't know, popular is not the word, but a lot of companies have done that, and, since he did it. So I think he was inspiration for a lot of other people. I can't say which corporations or which individuals, but he spoke all over the country, on a lot of the things he was doing, and especially involved in childcare and issues like that. And clearly, there were a number of companies, for instance, who started on-site childcare companies, following his model. And he was such a successful corporate executive. I mean, Strider was such a successful companies that others came to talk to him and wanted to know what was his success. So he certainly talked to people like that. If there was any particular corporate executive that he inspired or mentored, I wouldn't know who they were. He didn't mention that. I know he mentored people like, the chef,
Barbara Lynch.
And so it was not only and he mentored in the other nonprofits he worked with. He helped them, like I said, he served as chair of a lot of these organizations and helped build them up. And he just didn't go to meetings. He really made some major structural changes in the organizations he supported.
I'm wondering also, I'm encouraging others to put your questions in the chat. He didn't necessarily want you to elaborate on his background where some of his family members were lost in the Holocaust. Do you think that influenced his outlook on business and on life, this sense of the right thing to do?
I'm not sure the Holocaust itself. I think a lot of his life experience had more of an impact on that. I mean, certainly his uncle, Jacob Hiatt, who I mentioned, who was very philanthropic in his own right. In fact, Jacob was the first Jewish judge in Lithuania, and before he left the country. And I think after he left the Merchant Marine, before he went back to Harvard, he worked in a factory in Worcester for probably about 6 months, and it was getting involved in union organizing, and he saw what it meant for people to try to raise a family on a factory job. So he was very sensitive to things like that, and I think he was very sensitive as the unfavorite son, or not, certainly not the favorite son, let me put it that way. He was always the underdog at home, and so I think that certainly had an impact on his life.
Interesting. Yeah, it's there are a lot of different influences, it sounds like.
He was just very sensitive to people.
Mhm.
He saw someone who had a problem, like with childcare. He saw his executive assistant at Strideright had adopted a baby, and he saw the financial burdens that had. And that's when he started the providing benefits for adoption benefits for employees. He saw a need. Same with the intergenerational daycare center. He saw there was a need for people of so-called sandwich generation who were dealing with children as well as their elderly parents, and they needed some support. So he just decided to start that.
Okay, thank you. We have another question in the chat. Someone wonders what Arnold Hiatt is doing now. He's in his 90s, I believe.
Yeah, he'll be, I think, 96 in April. He's still involved with his family foundation. He started after he left Strideright. 5 years ago, when he was 90, he built a tennis court at he has a place up in Rhode Island. And he's still very active. I had lunch with him probably about 2 months ago, and he's still sharp, but except for the family foundation, he's really not doing that much. Obviously, not doing business work anymore. And
well, he earned some rest.
He did. He still certainly talks to political candidates, but he's not as involved as he certainly once was.
Right. Okay. Someone is thanking you for an inspirational presentation.
Thank you.
And a question is, was Strideright a closely held company? If so, would it have permitted Oh, sorry, would he have permitted it to think more about giving back than just short-term profits?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a public company, number one. It's on the stock exchange. And, one of the things that he's most proud of, as I pointed out, was that he put a lot of effort in getting the board to give a lot of money, or to agree to give a lot of money, 5% of the corporate profits. I think it was 5%, it might have been more, of corporate profits to the foundation. And the foundation was a vehicle which he was able to do a lot of this work, a lot of the charitable work, to pay for the subsidies and, start up the daycare center, the intergenerational daycare center, to, give money to community organizations, boys clubs, We Like Family Theater, smaller organizations. In fact, one of his probably most favorite for his employees, one of the most favorite benefits was that it permitted employees who wanted to work, take a day off, during the week to work for a nonprofit. He would let them do that at full pay.
Hmm.
And that it was a foundation who was able to support that. So it's a very public-minded company.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I wondered if he was involved in any particular activities in Newton. Maybe he had a larger canvas, but didn't know whether there were any particular programs he supported or
Not that important.
foundations.
Yeah, not that
Okay,
important.
right. Well, he certainly was involved in so many things nationally and internationally that,
Right. And a lot,
yeah.
in the greater Boston area. I just don't. There were so many. I just don't. And some of them were, pretty small grants, but
Hmm.
most of it were, bigger organizations.
There was something you said that I wanted to go back to, and I want to make sure I understood it correctly. You said he had kind of a soft spoken presence. Is that right?
Yes.
Or,
Yeah.
okay, because I think it was when you were talking about when he met Clinton.
Right. Yeah. It was a very. He has a very soft voice. He's just very mild mannered. You wouldn't think. You think of big, strong, corporate executives who speak loudly and, right in charge. And he's just very quiet. He just does a lot of listening. And yeah, I think soft spoken is probably the best way to describe him.
Right, which is not the stereotype we have of powerful corporate executives.
Not at all. Yeah.
Right, right. Um, I don't see more questions. Are there things that you didn't have a chance to talk about that you wanted to highlight? Do you feel like there's something you want to emphasize? Just sort of some parting thoughts for us
That's a
as
good
we
question.
learn more about this extraordinary man.
It just his empathy for others is so immense. And so many things I could say about him. He's just an amazing, he's so inspirational. Just
Hmm.
because he did things, like I said, because he felt it was the right thing to do. He didn't need his name. He didn't have his. He never wanted his name, like I said, on a building or a scholarship. It was always a Stride Right scholarship or some other scholarship. It was never involved. Even with his family foundation, it's not called a Hiatt. It's not called the Hiatt Family Foundation. It's the I think it A&S Foundation, which are the first names of his children, things like that. It's yes.
Right. He
I mean,
sounds like he walks humbly but has a big impact.
right, yeah. I guess,
Right.
you look up the word mention in a dictionary and there's going to be his picture.
Right, right. We do have another question that showed up, and that was I think you mentioned before he went to Stride Right where he had worked. It's Blue Bonnet Shoe, is that right?
Right. It was called Blue Bonnet, and then it changed its name because Blue Bonnet was too female oriented, and he wanted to expand. Uh, I forgot what it was called after that.
Okay. Um, and then he was hired from that company to Stride Right.
Stride actually bought that company because
Okay. Mhm.
they liked what he was doing there, and they liked him, so they purchased the company. They incorporated into Stride Right, and eventually that company basically disappeared. But he remained, obviously, for next 20 years.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, this is a good note to end on. I see a message from somebody that is describing um, Hiatt as a true leader, and she wishes that there were more people like him.
I certainly wish there were
So,
too. But
yeah,
one thing about the book, if anyone is interested in the book, I don't know if you have you could just basically,
hold it up. I thought I saw a copy behind you because my copy is in the library on display, which will be on display till the end of the month.
right? But if anyone is interested, they could just email me at B like in Barry, D like in David, Wanger, WANGER @gmail.com. And I'll send it to you autographed personally to whomever you like to for $15, including postage. So I just want more people to read about him and know about him. So feel free to do
Okay, I'm writing your email address in the chat again. B.
that.
Wanger, WANGER @gmail.com.
Just BD Wanger,
Okay.
BD Wanger @gmail.com.
Okay. All right. There, it's in the chat for all to see.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We're muted, but I'm sure people out there are giving you some applause. And we appreciate the chance to learn more about this amazing man. And we hope to see you at other Historic Newton and other Newton Free Library programs in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone that participated, and it was very enjoyable. Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you. Good night.
Take care, everyone.